Alright guys, in this next example it asks us to find the surface area S of the cylinder. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is break the cylinder up into a net, because a cylinder, it's made up of two circles and a rectangle. So I'm going to draw my rectangle first, and then I'm going to draw two circles connected to it. There's a couple of ways I could do it, but I'm just going to put my circles right here along the middle. So here's one circle and here is my other circle. Alright, so we have our one rectangle, our two circles, and I've got to note a couple of things. Well, the radius of this circle is 4 feet. I'm going to make a note that this is 4 feet. And the other thing I want to note is the height of this rectangle, or the width of this rectangle, is the same value as the height of this cylinder. So this height is 7 feet. And that is for the rectangle in this shape. Well, but the bottom line is I can use this net to help me set it up into finding formulas for the area of both of these shapes. Alright, so I have two circles and one rectangle here. Let's just make that note real quick. Two circles, I have one rectangle. And now let's find the area of both of these shapes. So let's write those formulas down. The area of a circle is equivalent to pi r squared. The area of a rectangle is equivalent to length times width. Well, let's just keep the math simple for now. Typically I would tell you to use 3.14 for pi. Today we're just going to use 3, and in the future we'll end up using 3.14. So what I'm going to do is just fill in information. So I know that I'm going to use 3 for pi for now, just to keep it simple. And I'm going to multiply, use the value, I'm going to multiply 3 times the radius, so I'm going to plug 4 in for the radius here. So we're going to plug in 4 squared. Okay, but let's stop here for a second. I've got two circles. So I can either find out what the area is of one circle, then double it later on, or I could just multiply by 2 right now, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply this area of the circle by 2. So we're just basically doubling it already. Then I don't have to do it in the future. Okay, now let's figure out what values go into this formula over here on the right for the rectangle. Well, what's the value for the length? Because there's not a value here. Well, I don't know a value for the length right now, but I know if I were to roll this cylinder back up so that it turns back into a cylinder, this rectangle, the length of the rectangle, fits all the way around this circle. So if the rectangle's length, it wraps around the circle, then it has to be equivalent to the circumference. So one thing I could do is make a note that L is the same thing in this case as this cylinder's circumference, or the circle's circumference. So L is equivalent to the circumference. So I'm just going to write that word down. And I can actually put parentheses around it and pretend that it's a value right now. So I have the circumference times the width in this case. Okay, so I'm going to multiply the circumference times the width. Well, how do we find the circumference? We've got to take that formula, which is 2 pi times r. 2 pi r, and don't forget to bring down the width. So we're going to multiply the circumference, which is 2 pi r, times w, the width. Okay, so what values will we plug into 2 pi r? Well, I'm going to take 2 and multiply it by, since I said just for this video we're going to use 3, the value 3 for pi, I'll multiply it by 3, and then we're going to multiply that value by the radius. The radius happens to be 4 feet, so I'll plug 4 in, and we're going to plug in a value for the width of this rectangle, and the width happens to be 7 feet here, so I'm going to plug a 7 in. Okay, so these are the values I'm going to multiply, which will give me the length times the width, or the area of this rectangle. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is go back to my circle problem. I'm going to find out what 4 squared is first. Well, that's 4 times 4, which is 16. So we're going to multiply 2 times 3 times 16. And then on this right-hand side, what I'm going to do is just multiply straight through. 2 times 3 is 6. That gives me a value of 6. In fact, I'm not going to multiply straight through. I'm going to use the associative property, and I'm going to group 4 and 7 together, which happens to be 28 when you multiply them. And now all I have to do is multiply 6 times 28, which happens to be, when I multiply these two values together, 168. So I have got 2 times 3 here, which is equivalent to 6. And now I'm going to bring the 16 down. I'm going to multiply 6 times 16. So 6 times 16, which will give me a value of 96. Oop, let's fix that real quick. 6 times 16 will give me a value of 96. So I've got 96 feet squared here, 168 feet squared here, and I've got to add both values together. So let's get some more room on the screen. And when we add 96 and 168, we get a value of 264. Don't forget your units, feet squared, and that's the surface area. So the surface area of this cylinder is equivalent to 264 feet squared.